And we transition right from our Havdalah to lighting our festival candles.
Page 300 and, oh, there are the lights. 384. And we continue with the Shehechianu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
Now summer's prospect, the world ripening and growing softer, the promise of harvest fulfilled, the warming sun lies before us. Now the vision of Torah, the world at peace and growing gentler, the promise of goodness fulfilled, the loving heart lies open to the mind. We continue with Baruch Hu on page 394. We rise.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Va'ed.
We continue in Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim בחוכמה פותח שערים, ובתבונה משנה עתים, ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים,
במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו.
בורא יום ולילה, גולל אור מפני חושך, וחושך מפני אור, ומעביר יום ומביא לילה,
ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים.
How do we find God? We find God revealed in the order in the physical universe, in the compassion of the human heart, and in the guiding wisdom of Torah.
Ahavat olam, Beit Yisrael, Amecha ahavta, Amcha ahavta. Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limadeta, otanu limadeta. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shochbenu, u'kumenu nasiach bechukecha, v'nizmach b'divrei Toratecha, u'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed, ki hem chayenu. V'yorech yameinu, uvachem nege yomam v'layla, nege yomam v'layla. Ki hem chayenu, v'yorech yameinu, uvachem nege yomam v'layla. V'ahavatecha tasir mimenu le'olamim. Baruch ata Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. Baruch Shem kevod malchuto leolam va'ed.
You may be seated.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadevarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom alevavecha Veshinantam levanecha, vedibarta bam, veshivtecha beveitecha, uvlechtecha vaderech, uvshokbecha, uvkumecha, ukshartam leot aliadecha, vehayu letotafot beineinecha, Uchtavtam amezuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tizkeru va'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'item kedoshim הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Page 406.
מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים, זה לי ענו ויאמרו. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי פד אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
We continue on page 412, and we join together with the reading for Shavuot. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for Adonai had come down upon it in fire. Torah, given amidst fire, is compared to fire. Just as fire lives forever, so do the words of Torah live forever. When one draws near to fire, one is burned by it. When one moves away from fire, one is chilled. On Shavuot, we warm ourselves by the light of Torah, our precious heritage.
וידבר משה את מועדי אדוני אל בני ישראל.
The festival Amidah begins on page 468, as you are working your way through it after we do our first blessings together, I just want to remind you to be on the lookout for the festival inserts. Please rise.
Adonai sefatai tivta ufi agite hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei
turn back to page 473. Your might, O God, renews the earth. With dewdrops of light and blessing, let the earth be illuminated and blessed. With dewdrops of joy and delight, let the earth
Rejoice and sing out.
With dewdrops of life and well-being, let the earth be revived and improved.
With dewdrops of redemption, let the earth be redeemed. Livracha velo liklala, lisova velo liratzon, livracha velo liklala, livracha velo liklala, lisova velo liratzon, livracha velo liklala, livracha velo liklala, lisova velo liratzon, livracha velo liklala, lechaim velo lemavet, lechaim, lechaim velo lemavet, lechaim, livracha velo liklala, lisova velo liratzon, livracha velo liklala, Kiddush.
We continue with the Festival Kiddush on page 386. Please rise. Stumble your It's grown-up stuff. We remain standing as we continue with the Aleinu on page 586.
Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, lateit gedula liotzer bereshit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama, shelo sam chalkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, va'anachnu korim umishachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu
our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people, whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. If there is someone who you are remembering tonight and you would like to share their names out loud, I invite you to do so now.
Louise Gaston, Herb Olarsh,
Rose Rubin,
Ethel Epstein,
My wife Susan Klein, my sister Melissa Bear, my aunt Firewoman, and the Holocaust survivor.
Adele Appel and Leonard Appel. Please rise as we join together for the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Yit Gadal v'yit Gadal Shmei Rabba B'Yamad Yivrach Rute Yamlich Malchute B'Chayav Hon V'Yom Echon Ufei D'Chol Beit Yisrael Ba'adav V'Zman Kariv V'Yimru Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'elam
Olamei Amaya.
Yitbarach v'yishabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei kedusha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata ta'miran b'yalma v'yiru amen Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen Oseh shalom v'imruma Ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, and to which we say, Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mroma, uyaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru
And with that, we conclude our service. You may be seated, and we begin our program for this evening. And me? Okay. So tonight we, in addition to celebrating Shavuot, we are celebrating 50 years of women in the rabbinate. Yesterday was actually literally the 50th anniversary of Rabbi Sally Presand's ordination. And to say that that was an historic event and opened up so many doors and changed Judaism would be an understatement. And so tonight we sort of want to pay tribute to that and look back over some of those 50 years with our speakers tonight. And so to begin our program tonight, it's my pleasure to invite a colleague and a classmate of mine. We were not ordained in the same year, but we did overlap. Rabbi Mary Zamor, who serves as the executive director of the Women's Rabbinic Network. And in Mary's capacity, she is doing her part to change the face of Judaism to all of our benefit. Most recently, she has been a very vocal voice in the movement to make sure that everyone, regardless of gender, gets equal pay and equal benefits. And that has been very important for our movement and for the other Jewish movements as well. Yes, Pete?
Watching last night at the synagogue, and Rabbi Heffel had mentioned that the year when that was she became that Rabbi became
Ordained.
She was born.
Oh, right. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Rabbi Mary Zamor to join us.
You're welcome.
Rabbi Appel and I used to make snide comments to each other in class.
We still sometimes make side comments.
It is, of course, truly a pleasure to be in this space with all of you as a member of Temple Emanu-El and having served here as intern, assistant, and associate.
Rabbi Timur, we've got a message in the chat. If people can speak more into the mic, that would be helpful.
Into the mic, yes. Thank you for letting me know that. Actually, true story. The first year I served here, no one had really shown me how to use a microphone, and took about a year to anyone tell me that in the sanctuary. And if you remember the sound system in the sanctuary. So always tell me if I'm not speaking into the microphone. So thank you to the clergy, rabbis, and cantors for inviting me to be with the Temple Emanu-El family on Shavuot and on this, as we let go of the anniversary, June 3rd, marking not only Rabbi Presand's ordination, 50 years, but of course the 5 decades of women in the rabbinate. I have, since I've continued to be a member here, the last 7 years now, July 1st, starting my 8th year, serving the Women's Rabbinic Network. And in that work, we advocate for the issues that affect the lives of the members of our organization. So we always talk about supporting Reform women rabbis, which is incredibly niche, but advocating for all, and hopefully bettering the Jewish world and the greater world through our advocacy. So 2 nights ago, WRN celebrated Erev 50th, and Rabbi Presand was asked at the very end of our program, what do you think the next 50 years are going to bring? And she very smartly twisted the question, as a good rabbi will, and she said very directly, well, if you had asked me 50 years ago what to expect now, I would have never believed we're dealing with the same issues. It was a little poignant. And I've been thinking a lot about the Shechianu prayer itself, about the idea of v'kimanu, v'higianu, lazman hazeh, what it means to be sustained and then to come to celebration. And I think very much this is the story of women in the rabbinate, and for women in the cantorate, or women in Jewish education, or Jewish professionals, and women writ large in America, North America, and the world. There's yet no place in the world where we see 100% equity, and that is important. And women are a subjugated majority. Just think about that, when a majority can be subjugated that way. And therefore, you have to take into account what it is for anybody else of any other protected minority identity, all the more so for them. So let's put that kind of in the back. And now I want to share with you one of my strange hobbies. Every once in a while, I like to Google rabbi image. What do you think I get? Yep, the white man, beard, black hat, black suit. It's starting to shift. Used to be I could go through pages and pages and pages of that search and never find another type of image. And now there are other images starting to pop up, including, as you frequently like to reference, Rabbi Buchdahl. So because we see her on the computer and Central Synagogue and her incredible footprint in the world. But the reality is that most people explicitly think of that image and certainly implicitly think of that image. And that's where the problem begins. And so when we talk about the path to the rabbinate and the way that opened doors then for the cantorate and for other identity groups to be Jewish leaders, first of all, that revolution was already underway in many ways. And we know we just marked the 100th anniversary of Bat Mitzvah. So that's like, for instance, one of the examples. In the late 1800s, the revolution was getting women out of the house and even doing philanthropic work. That was revolutionary in that time. So that's the backdrop in which we're working. So when we talk about that path, I want to just lift up a few interesting names, some of whom you may have heard of before and some may be completely new to you. And I hope at the very least I'm just going to whet your appetite, and either Temple Emanu-El will do the full class from the WRN curriculum, or you'll enjoy reading a book, for instance, Pam Newdell's wonderful book, The Women Who Would Be Rabbis. So we could discuss many places to start. We could start in the Torah, we could go to the Talmud, and there in both places and throughout Jewish history, we'd find amazing examples of women who served like the men. I'm just going to put it like that. There weren't yet rabbis in the Torah. They were just, developing in the Talmud. So you would find women who functioned very much like men leaders, male leaders. And but I'm going to do a huge leap forward in history and go to the 16th century to lift up the name of Osnat Bazrani. She lived in Mosul in 1590. She was Kurdish. And her story becomes basically one of these themes we're going to see throughout Jewish history. By the way, there's a lovely children's book that lifts her up, so I highly recommend that, by Sigal Samuel. Her father led a yeshiva, and he got sick and died. Her husband got sick and died. But she had learned by her father's side from childhood and had the innate love of Jewish learning. And so in the void of any men to be heir to this dynasty of Jewish learning in this yeshiva, she stepped into that role and seemingly was accepted in that role. And we see this played out throughout history, as I said, and there are many fine examples of this, for instance, in the Hasidic world, the ultra-Orthodox world, when we look at the Ashkenazic, Eastern European models. But now we're going to do another huge leap, because we only have about 15 minutes, to the 1900s, to Ray Frank. Ray Frank was called the girl rabbi of the Golden West by the newspapers. And she, again, had an innate love of Jewish learning, and she became a journalist, actually, after serving as like a Hebrew school teacher. And in 1890, found herself in Spokane, Washington, which of course then was the great frontier. And she should have bought some property, I guess, at that time, right? Would have been the good thing to do. There was a fight in the community. There were two factions, right? Nothing new here. And there were no high holiday services. It was Rosh Hashanah. And basically she said that she would preach because they couldn't get their act together. And she preached so well that they said, please stay until Yom Kippur and preach again. And from that, she launched this amazing career of traveling throughout the US and preaching and teaching, and they would sell tickets, and she had an agent, and it was a big deal. And the press called her a rabbi. But she herself actually did not want to be a rabbi and did not believe women should be rabbis. And in fact, she believed women should never work after marriage. And she was true to her name. She got married quite late for that time period, in her early 40s, quite late not for our standards, of course. And she then just became she continued as a helpmate to her husband and never appeared in public again in that capacity. I know, right? Very different time. Now we're going to do another leap forward. We're going to go to Cincinnati, and we're going to meet Martha Newmark. Martha Newmark, as a teenage girl, again, same pattern, learned Torah from her father. Her father was a professor at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. At that time period, there was only one campus of Hebrew Union College, and it was in Cincinnati. She started off like in the youth group programs. They were kind of like zooped up Hebrew school for teenagers, and then went on to the college program and kept studying and studying. Parallel to this, by the way, her father was bringing her to his pulpit that was in a resort community outside of Cincinnati, and she preached and and did everything. And it was a little controversial for the congregants, but in the end, they kind of liked it and thought she did a good job and let her to continue to do it. So what happened was there was a shortage of rabbis. Like, again, watch for the patterns. In that time period, there was a shortage of rabbis, especially in the smaller, underserved congregations of the Midwest. And her classmates were being sent out for holiday pulpits. And she kind of looked up and said, what about me? I mean, after all, she'd had the experience for years of doing this for her father's pulpit. And it ensued a huge debate for 2 years among the faculty, and then it was thrown to the CCAR in 1922 at Cape May, New Jersey. The CCR convention met, and they debated this. The wives that were in attendance were invited in to give their opinions, and the conference voted, and they all agreed by a good margin, not unanimous by any way, shape, or form. But they did agree that if women were to be ordained rabbis, that they would accept them into the CCAR. But alas, it would take another 50 years. So unfortunately, the faculty agreed, and then the Board of Governors nixed the whole thing. And that was it. We're going to take a jump a few states over and go to West 68th Street. And go to learn about Jewish Institute of Religion. Today, it's Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. They merged in 1950. But in that time period, they were separate. The legendary Rabbi Stephen Wise, the great orator of his time, he founded the synagogue, and he founded this Institute of Study for adults next door. And in fact, until the recession of 2008, it was still owned by Stephen Wise when they sold it, unfortunately. But in that time period, when he founded that Institute of Study, he said it was agreed that men and women could study equally. That was in their mandate. And it was not reform, it was pluralistic, progressive. So, several women, 3 especially, tried to be ordained as rabbis through that institute. They tried to at least get into the rabbinical program. A lot of these programs weren't as formal as today, so you would start studying, and then finally there would be a set of classes at the end that only people who were going to be ordained as rabbis would take. So there were 2 women in 1922, and they did not make it. But I'm going to jump to the third one because her story is truly remarkable and actually quite sad. Helen Hadassah Leventhal in 1932 studied at JIR, and she was nothing less than a top student, if not the top student. She took every single class year after year for 6.5 years, and again, she sought ordination. Now remember, when I say she took every single class, I mean it. Like every single class the men took, she should have been ordained. And in the 11th hour, Stephen Wise and the faculty decided they would not ordain her. They granted her an MA, which the women were going to get anyhow, and then a special certificate saying that she had taken all these extra classes, but not ordained. Let's skip over, continuing our journey east, it seems, to meet Regina Jonas. This is a name you may know. It's been lifted up quite a bit lately, thank God, because it certainly deserves to be. But just note that this is a similar time frame in that Helen Leventhal is trying to fight to be ordained. Regina Jonas is doing the same thing. This is the part that's mind-blowing in Nazi Germany, Dafka, Berlin. I mean, it's just a story that you couldn't make up. And so she is studying at the Hochschule, which is the liberal seminary, and it is the cradle of Jewish Enlightenment Haskalah thinking, meaning that it mixes the best of academic scientific approach with the best of Judaism. But Regina Jonas herself did not consider herself a Reform Jew. She considered herself a progressive Jew. And so she was very oriented towards halakha, Jewish law. And at that time, they let her take classes, and again, it's the same story. It's just someone who loves Jewish learning, who wants to serve her people. And so it became clear that she kept asking if she could be ordained. So her mentor assigned her to write a thesis, the rabbinical thesis, on whether or not women can be ordained. To me, this just speaks so deeply of the irony of women functioning in the world that not only are you held back, but you have to do the extra lifting to be held back. So you can read her thesis in translation. There's a wonderful biography by Lisa Klapek that's been translated, and you can actually read her thesis both in the original, they have copies of it in there, and the translation. But alas, the head of the seminary, who was saying that he would ordain her, died. And the debate reopened, and they decided not to ordain her. They would not let her sit for the final exam, and therefore they could not ordain her. That's how they did that. But Max Diamond, another mentor who was a professor at that seminary, decides to ordain her. In 1935, he ordains her privately. And one of the interesting things you'll see about the language about Sally Priesand specifically is some of us say Rabbi Priesand was the first woman to be ordained. And some, of course, then say, well, no, it's the first one in North America. I particularly like to say that it is the first public ordination. But you need a little bit of a context to understand what that means. And that's why I think it's a little tricky. You have to dance around it. And Regina Jonas is the first privately ordained. And we always have to say then that we know of, because private is private, and we may not know. So, but it's really a tragic story in that even after ordination, she was basically stuck doing the same things she did before, which was teaching religious school, teaching day school, and serving as a quasi religious school director. And it was only because in Nazi Germany, the men were starting to either flee if they could or were deported to camps, that there were suddenly these openings in congregations for her to be on the bima. And she was slowly being allowed to preach and teach on a different level. And that's very heartbreaking. And then she was deported with her mother to Theresienstadt, and there she served side by side with other leaders in the Jewish community, preaching and teaching and lifting up and giving pastoral care to her Jewish community. And it was only when she was deported to Auschwitz in 1944 that it is presumed she dies the same day. Very sad. But that brings us to Rabbi Priesand. And some joy. But Rabbi Priesand's story is so remarkably similar to some of these other stories we've now seen. So Rabbi Priesand, I think, had the amazing luck to be in the right moment in history, in second wave feminism. She had parents that were unbelievably supportive and never held her back. And she had the personal perseverance to make it happen. And so when she was a 16-year-old, she wrote to Hebrew Union College asking if she could study there and become a rabbi. They actually wrote back and said, no, you can't, but you can study here. And so she went, remember Martha Newmark? She went to Sally Priesand, Rabbi Priesand, went to the pre-college program. Then by that time period, the University of Cincinnati had a joint program with Hebrew Union College because there was a rabbi shortage. I'm just going to keep saying this because now everyone's decrying the fact that there's yet another rabbi shortage, as if it's the first time it's ever happened to the Jewish community. So what can I say? The year I got ordained, it was the opposite. There were too many rabbis and not enough jobs, so I was very fortunate to be here and have this job for many reasons, of course. And so Rabbi Priesand then, by the time she was at the University of Cincinnati, 1964, they were already saying in the papers that she was going to be the first rabbi. So the pressure was already starting to build up. But she never had secured a promise from actually HUC-JIR that they were going to ordain her. They never said at any point. And in fact, to this day, Rabbi Priesand cheekily says in presentations, I'm probably the only rabbi who has been ordained by Hebrew Union College that never sat before an admissions board. They basically had never got around to it because they never formally admitted her. And so by the time that 1972 was rolling around, they were still debating whether or not they were going to ordain her. And unfortunately, a year and a half before, Nelson Glick, who was the driving force behind this, may I add, with a lot of pressure from the women of Reform Judaism. They were true champions of women's ordination, huge supporters. And especially Jane Evans, by the way, in the late 1950s, Zichrona Livracha. And so he dies, and now Alfred Gottschalk becomes the president of Hebrew Union College. And so he had the choice then. Does he uphold the choice to ordain or not? And the faculty starts putting pressure again not to do it. He decides to do it. He does it because he believes in it, plus there's a lot of pressure in the Jewish community now to do it. And so there was so much debate, in fact, that the document that we receive when we're ordained, that action is, of course, by the laying of hands and the blessing, that's the ordination, but it is, you receive what's called a shtar shmicha, which is this document, is a graduation certificate intrinsically. She received an empty tube on June 3rd, 1972, because the faculty had been fighting about the language of that document for so long that they missed all the deadlines for the calligrapher to produce it. And she only received it later. Being that I've said his name publicly, I will note, and I hope you all know, that unfortunately, Rabbi Gottschalk, Dr. Gottschalk, has the honor, of course, of this historic ordination in history. But as it's now been publicly documented in the Morgan Lewis report, he also was a predator and a sexual abuser. And so it's very hard to hold both at the same time. That's when you need the kayam, the sustenance of getting to the joy of the Hag, Higianu. So that is the story of Rabbi Presand. I'm going to end there, but I'm going to leave you, as I do every single community. And I leave you with this list of things I want every community to do, some of which your community, our community, is already doing or starting to do. So this is not a comment on whether or not you are. This is the same list I give everybody. Have to find the list. Please observe the yortzeit of Rabbi Regina Yonas. It's Parshat Bereshit. Many congregations are putting up a plaque, and that she becomes part of the yortzeit list. Please do a review of the pay of your employees to make sure that you are living up to pay equity, especially through the gender lens, but through all lenses. Adopt a robust paid family and medical leave policy for all employees and clearly communicate it. And finally, adopt an ethics policy to create safe and respectful spaces in your community and practice having strong procedures. Okay, thank you. Hag Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi Zamor, for your leadership and for your sharing of these stories, these names that we need to learn more about, and hopefully we will. Hopefully we can do, and you have give us a perfect introduction to these women, and we hope that we can continue to learn about their stories. And now we have the really wonderful opportunity to hear about some more stories from rabbis who have impacted our community, who have impacted our larger Jewish world, and we are lucky to have Rabbi Alan Lewis, Rabbi Mary Zamor, and Rabbi Becky J. Be in conversation with our wonderful cantor Martha Novick to talk about their stories, about what it means to them in the rabbinate, their experiences, and we'll have opportunity for a little question and answer as well. If you're joining us online, you can write your questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure to ask them as well.
years.
What's so amazing to me is that we have 3 incredible rabbis, but they do represent 3 different generations, and that's really important. Sorry. I know which generation I fall into. So I'd like, actually, Ellen, Rabbi Lewis, to ask what your journey was to become a rabbi.
How many hours do we have? I was actually sitting here thinking, a lot of you know that I grew up in this congregation. My parents joined in thank you, Rabbi Seymour. When I was at HUC, by the way, there was a rumor that the women didn't talk loudly enough. And there weren't so many women, first of all. And I went in, and the person who had repeated it was a beloved homiletics professor. And although I look back sometimes and I think I had no courage, I had enough courage to go talk to him. And I said to him, maybe some women don't talk loudly enough, but nobody has ever accused me of not talking loudly enough. And I didn't think it was a productive thing for him to say. And he was a wonderful man, and he totally agreed with me, and he said he would never repeat anything like that again. So my parents joined in '54. The temple was very small. It was a very close-knit community. Everybody went on Friday night. Friday night, right, was a big service. We knew who baked what for the oneg. It wasn't Entenmann's. And Jack Stern was the rabbi of my youth. So if you knew Jack Stern, he was many, many things, but among the most important thing to me, I think, as a child was how loving he was. He was a very kind, loving person. And I used to tell him that whenever I told a children's story on the bima, I always heard his voice in the back of my head. And then Rabbi Kroloff came. I was already a teenager. There were a couple of rabbis in between. And I think his impact on me, when I look back, had to do with both his intelligence and his political activism. So as I look back, I can see pieces of what influenced me. Although I think what influenced me most importantly was the sense of community that I experienced here growing up. It felt like a place where people who didn't have to love you loved you. So I think that was profound for me. When I got, I'll try not to keep rambling, Martha. But when I got to college, I did a few things in college. I was pre-med for a bunch of years. I started to take some religious studies. And halfway through my junior year, the dean called me in. And he said to me, "You're halfway through your junior year. You think you're going to declare a major?" So as we chatted, he turned around, and behind him, he pulled a catalog off of his bookshelf. So this would have been 73. And he said to me, "I know what you should be." And to that point, I had no clue. He said, "You should be a rabbi." And what did he have? He had a Hebrew Union College catalog. And because he was Episcopalian, but he was raised by missionary parents, he was very interested in religion, he knew about Sally Priesing. And so he was the first one who said to me that I should think about this. And I walked out onto the green. I was a little dazed. And I ran into a friend of mine who was very involved in the Jewish community. And I said, "The dean thinks I should become a rabbi." And this friend looked me straight in the eye. He said, "Everybody I know who ever became a rabbi ended up wearing a halo," which was his way of saying, you know, if you're going to do it, don't do that. Like, don't think that you're better than everybody else. And so anyway, I didn't do it right away, but a couple of years later, I was in Jerusalem. I applied. All the women from my era whom I've talked to about this, we all applied with a great deal of ambivalence. And when we got in, we weren't sure we would stay. all of us, each step along the way, we're, yeah, maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't do it, because nobody was guaranteeing us any jobs, that's for sure. In fact, the opposite. They mostly said to us, look, we don't know if you're going to get hired. So nothing was a surprise to us in those early years. But that was my early journey.
I feel like some of you may have sat on my search committees. You probably have heard these stories before. I too grew up in a very small Jewish community in Garden City, Long Island. And in fact, I came here, of course, as intern without ever seeing Westfield. Because Rabbi Kroloff and the search committee came to Hebrew Union College and then offered me the job, and then I decided to move here. Once I moved here, I looked around and I said, holy smokes, I just moved to Garden City, Long Island. A place I was desperate to leave in many ways, because, except now it was a large, vibrant Jewish community, but it was really like almost a carbon copy, and the irony, of course, is 26 years later, I'm still living here, so obviously I like it. So, very much so. So, this very small Jewish community, very tightly, we would know exactly who baked what at the Oneg, and I was one of 7 in my high school who were Jewish, and there was, a bit of anti-Semitism, and I thought I wanted to be a museum curator. And basically, it's a very long story, but I'll just make it shorter and just say I worked at the Met Museum right before college in an internship in the summer between high school and college, and realized I didn't want to be a museum curator. And one of my friends in the program kept talking about how he wanted to be a priest. And I thought to myself, well, if he could be a priest, I could be a rabbi. So that's how I got here. Let's see, I graduated college in 1991.
I just want to say it is an honor to be sitting just with you, all of you, and one that I know my friends and colleagues are very jealous of so early, a few weeks into my rabbinic career. I grew up in a very large Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York, and come from a really proud interfaith home. And it wasn't until I actually went to Israel when I was in college as an intern when I started doubting my own Judaism. My family celebrated all the holidays. We went to church and temple, and at temple, no one would speak to us, but everyone would stare at us. And we didn't really know, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing what my mom said to do. So she'd say bow, and I'd bow. And at church, it was a Korean church that my mom was a religious leader in. And that was also hard because I didn't know Korean growing up, and so she would say bow and I would bow. And when I went to Israel with a group of college classmates to intern, it was the first time someone told me I wasn't Jewish, and I was just shocked. And the reasons were manifold. One was because my mom's not Jewish. The other was because I was Asian and Jewish. Another would be that I was too reform. And the idea just never crossed my mind because my family grew up shul shopping. My dad became a bar mitzvah at East End Temple. My family, the holidays were big, and I come from a really proud feminist family who always put an orange on the Seder plate and inserted feminist readings to the Maxwell Haggadah that we use still. And that started a process for me of understanding. It seemed like my identity as a Jew really hurt these people. And I didn't know why. I just didn't understand. To me, still, God loves us all, and we all love each other. That is what humanity is, and maybe we just have to learn how to love a little more, learn how to love each other and ourselves. And I started taking Exploring Judaism classes at Central Synagogue and fell in love with what I was learning. And actually last week's sermon was my first Devar Torah at Central during our Exploring Judaism class, and I found it so fitting because I was just so nervous both times. But mostly I fell in love too with Lee and Barbara, who are my surrogate grandparents. Lee, Zikronam Livraha, who were from Minnesota and North Dakota. And they came up to me one day and said, well, Lee said, how do I know you? It was on 55th and Park. And I said, we're in class together. And he said, help me with my hearing aid. And I said, okay. And then he started calling me his granddaughter. And Barbara said, hello, granddaughter. And I just wanted to pursue what I loved. And it just kind of changed everything for me. And I went through like what you would call a confirmation or conversion process. But this was never something I saw for myself. I always wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer. Hi, Mommy. And that, yeah, that's it. Now I'm here. So it feels very surreal.
So my next question, which I will actually answer first, even though I'm not a rabbi, is what experience at HUC stands out most in your mind? I'll briefly tell you mine. It was my first day at HUC as a cantorial student. All four of us were women. We walked to our assigned classroom and sat down, and the professor kept coming into the classroom, looking at us and walking out of the classroom, and kept coming in and looking at us, and then walking out of the classroom and looking around. And finally, he said, where is everybody? And all four women at once said, we're it. And that was the beginning of a new era for women in the cantorate. So what experience stands out most in your mind, Becky?
What year did you start?
I started in 1979.
Just a reminder, Barbara Oswald was invested in 1975. So 76. 76. Sorry, excuse me. So we'll be celebrating that soon. That's right, in 4 years.
Ellen, do you want
Oh, you need to start? Okay. I just want to mention that there's 42 years between me and Rabbi Jay in ordination. Like that's a long time. And for that reason, if you ask me what it was like at HUC, I mean, I have memory, like Cantor Novick has, I have a memory here and there. One of the memories that actually came to me when I was first invited to participate in this program was that all the women, we were always being asked to speak about being a woman rabbi. In fact, I had a stock speech called, "What do you call a woman rabbi?" because everybody said that to us. It's somewhere in a file in my basement. I haven't been able to find it, but we the women used to say, someday we won't be asked to talk about being a woman rabbi. Someday they'll ask us to talk about Maimonides. I hope that doesn't make me sound ungrateful, because I don't intend it that way. And I actually did my thesis on Maimonides, but don't ask me to. What I was thinking about, and this is a result of when we were at the CCAR conference recently, and they had a bunch of the early women, they did public interviews of us, and we were all talking in advance about what stories to tell. Because, and why, right? Because if you think about Jewish tradition, the stories that we've inherited, the Torah, other stories, they've all been redacted, which is to say they were shaped by people. They weren't just random stories. They were told with a purpose. And so I was talking with my colleagues about what's the purpose of our continuing to tell some of these stories. And what I'd like to say is I think the purpose is maybe twofold. One is that we can tell these stories without pain, where years ago they may have been painful. And two is the reason that we can tell them without pain is that we've all gone on to have careers that we are happy with. They might not have been the careers we had anticipated one way or the other, but whatever happened to us, we worked it through. We didn't just survive. We worked it through so that we could comfortably move into what it meant to be a woman rabbi to each of us. So that's my HUC story. I mean, I'm sure I could come up with stories, but is why tell what stories you tell? And I think it's because of that. It's because whatever happened, we got here.
So I have a lot of gratitude for HUC. Nobody becomes a cantor or a rabbi because you don't love learning, right? That is, and the fun thing is that you're with a ton of other people who love learning. So, the opportunity to learn with top scholars and to just immerse yourself in Jewish learning is a dream. And I just had received my honorary doctorate for 25 years, and I was speaking to one of my classmates, and I don't know, he said something like, "Oh, I would never go through that again." I was like, "Are you kidding? I'd go back in 5 seconds. I would love 5 years of just Jewish learning. Sign me up." But I'm going to say the hard thing, because I have to say the hard thing. Because frankly, I would not be the executive director of the Women's Rabbinic Network if within, I think it had to be a month to 6 weeks of landing in Israel for my first year at Hebrew Union College on the Jerusalem campus, if one of my friends hadn't come to me in tears because the president of the college just sexually harassed her. And slowly over time, not so slowly, over that year, I realized other women in my class had also been sexually harassed. And then we came back to the States, and other women were sexually harassed. And then the inequalities I saw both in the classroom and in the placement process for jobs, internships, and finally placement, for rabbinic placement, were crazy. And it's all been documented now. For 30 years, I walked around thinking, are we crazy? Am I crazy? Did that really all happen? Yes, it really happened. So I wouldn't be doing that work. So that's frankly, has completely shaped my rabbinate in many, many ways. And I hope for the better,
We thank God for you. Truly, thank God. In that vein, HUC is a little fresh for me. And I'm not in a place where I can speak about my experience at HUC without pain. I would say that my 5 years has been characterized by pain, and it is through you and you and you and all of you that have provided me some sense of redemption. As a person of color, as a woman of color, there's a lot of learning that we have to do in Jewish spaces. And the experiences that I've had are not ones that I wish to, lay out on the table. But they give me gratitude because I've actually gone to Rabbi Prosnit, Cantor Novik, Rabbi Zamor, Rabbi Lewis with these, and Cantor Goldman, who I was lucky to study with. They showed me what camaraderie and what community was, and that is not something I have felt to such a depth before, and this community has been my saving grace. So I personally stopped going to my own shul, Central Synagogue, when I was at HUC because it felt foreign to me, this religion that I fell in love with, and now I was at school and learning these values that did not measure up to action. I am the first to tell you, and you saw through my 3 years here, I make many mistakes, big mistakes. So I'm not I don't expect things to be perfect, but I do expect a level of respect. And as a person of color, I think that the institution, and I'm only comfortable telling you this because I've told the institution to their face many times, in many ways, email, text message, phone. There's work to be done, like there's always work to be done inside ourselves. And we just have to get in there and do the work. Listen, you throw your underwear on the table, I'll throw my underwear on the table. Like, you wash yours, I'll wash mine. We all are family. We need to have clean clothes. And we just gotta get in there and do the work. And so in terms of experience, I think that it's given me a lot of, in some sense, koach, to know that you all have been on this path before me and are just incredible human beings. And I am proud to carry on that legacy and humbled to do so. And in terms of experience, I pray that, like Rabbi Lewis says, we can one day speak about that without pain.
I have to say,
Yeah.
Rabbi Jay,
Yep.
It's so weird to hear that.
that when you came to our temple a couple of years ago, you truly were reaching out for something, a place where you could seek comfort and strength. And we knew that, and we wanted to give you everything that you needed to become the wonderful rabbi you are and will be in the future. Go ahead, Rabbi Zane.
No, I was just gonna say, you want to hear mistakes? I remember the high holidays when, like, I think it was my first or second year when I totally ran over your cue for your sermon and song. Oh my gosh, horrifying.
Rabbis do it all the time.
Horrifying. Oh no, not on the high holidays. That was bad.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how Cantor's put up with
Oh
this.
my gosh, that was bad.
Because we love our rabbis, that's why.
Oh, another question? I don't know. Yeah, we can. We're rabbis.
Okay, since we're running a little bit out of time, I'm going to combine two questions. The first question is, what do you think was your greatest challenge? Not only becoming a rabbi, but being a rabbi. And what was your greatest highlight of being a rabbi? I know it's just a couple of weeks, but
I mean, there have been so many challenges. I mean, honestly, I think of, I'm laughing about those mistakes now. I'm like thinking about it. Whew. Especially this congregation in the early years got to see all of them. And on the more serious side, I mean, to live through 9/11 with all of you, right? Talk about challenge. That transformed my rabbinate too in many ways. And this reckoning, this Me Too reckoning that, I am with many partners, with many, many partners leading through the reform movement through. It's been the most challenging time of my life, honestly. It's still going. So, still going. In a much better place. If you'd asked me that last summer, I probably just would have rolled into a ball and cried. But, just the weight of it all. It was just tremendous. It was daily calls with survivor victims. It was people in the movement, pushing back against it happening. It wasn't clear if it was going to happen. It was just like a lot of moving pieces that were just pretty hard. But the joys outweigh everything. Oh my gosh. I mean, just to sit with one person, two people, many people in a classroom and study and teach and preach. I mean, those moments just fill me with energy, and even in the hard moments when we hold each other, it's a joy.
Well, as Rabbi Zamor says, there have been many challenges. Luckily, 42 years later, I don't remember a lot of them. My first challenge was getting hired. I was the last person in my class to be hired. All the way through school, all of my classmates had said to me, you don't have to worry about getting a job, you know, you're so good, you're gonna get hired. And we get to the week of interviewing. First of all, the biggest handicap there was that I had a baby, which you may not think of as a handicap. But a baby on a resume in that time was a real handicap. And I, well, yeah, see, our class, I mean, I think later classes don't put that information on resumes. But our class, at that point, it was routine to put family information. It's a while ago. I didn't mind that, actually. I mean, I felt like I was a package deal, right? So if they didn't want my baby, they didn't want me, and they didn't want my baby, and they didn't want me. And I ended up taking a job that nobody else wanted. I mean, literally, because it was a job where there were two senior rabbis who hated each other, and they were fighting in public, and everybody knew about it. So the only other person who interviewed for it was a classmate of mine, because his aunt was a member of the congregation and he had promised her that he would interview. So literally, that's why I got a job. But I did get a job. I would say there were challenges. You know, my first experience, I was an assistant and an associate for 5 years in Dallas, and there were many good things about that, but there were difficulties. Some related to gender, probably a lot related to gender that at the time I didn't see that way. And then I was in Summit for 8 years, which was a very rough experience for me. And frankly, when I left Summit, I thought, if I never see the inside of another synagogue again, it'll be too soon. And I was doing my analytical training at the same time, and I thought, you know, my practice isn't full-time yet, so I can take a part-time pulpit. And this is actually one of the highlights, I think, of my rabbinate, is that I took this part-time pulpit, where subsequently Rabbi Zamer and I shared this pulpit. And I figured I'll take it for a couple years. When my practice gets to be full-time, I'll leave. So my practice got to be full-time, but I stayed, and I stayed for 19 years. And I stayed for 19 years because finally I found the kind of community where I could be the kind of rabbi I wanted to be. And that wasn't anything I ever would have predicted. I mean, I ended up doing pulpit work for about 35 years, which was still is a great shock to me in many ways. But I feel like I've had an opportunity to do a lot of things, so, and create what I wanted to create.
I think it's fresh. The challenges, I would say, honestly, the most overt challenge for me has been the way I look. The fact that I'm Korean American. Everyone thinks I'm related to another Korean American rabbi, which now I just go with because it works in my favor. And if you're going to come up to me and ask, I'm going to say yes. But no, we're not related. I think that the biggest challenge is in a lot of majority white progressive spaces, the idea, there's a lot of shame that accompanies not being woke or not being, there when it comes to having these difficult conversations. And that shame actually comes out in violent and aggressive ways. And a huge challenge for me is I feel like I haven't been myself these past 5 years at all. And that is in part why I'm so excited for my next position, because I will have the time and the space on weekends to go to services with my grandma and Barbara and just be with community, be with God, and be with love, and get back to that person I was when I applied to rabbinical school.
Can you talk about Teruah and what Teruah is?
Yes, I can. Trua is the rabbinic call for human rights, and we are an organization that strives to lift up the ethical values of Judaism and use Jewish resources and texts to look at on-the-ground human rights issues that occur not just in the United States, but all around the world. And I was a fellow last summer and worked for the Surveillance Technology Oversight Committee as a fellow, and it was a really incredible opportunity to learn about how our surveillance, how data selling is actually disproportionately negatively affecting communities of color in the United States and around the world. It was terrifying as well to know that every time, like you do the Face ID, that data can be sold to someone. And it is used in ways that I just could have never imagined. It was a very humbling experience to kind of see the world and then see literally my location in it, and how ads change based on where I am, et cetera. And it revived something in me. Like, it really revived the why of coming back to the table and doing the work. And so the challenge was there. The highlights have been here. So, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I just want to say, first of all, I have known Rabbi Lewis since I'm a little girl. We did. We did, and I loved her parents so. But your presence here has always meant something special to me and to many of the people in this congregation. And we're so lucky that you're in our midst.
I'm so grateful to be back. Thank you.
And Rabbi,
My last pulpit, I had to go somewhere, right? It's not too far.
and rabbis,
I got one more
yeah.
This is about Mike. In the mic. So when I was looking, I left my pulpit and I was looking for a Shabbat morning worship experience that didn't have a bar bat mitzvah attached to it. And I thought, I think Westfield has that. So I came down, I live in Bernardsville, I came down the hill, I walked through the front door, and I ran into Mike. And he looked at me and he said, your parents used to come through that door, and they used to sit in that pew. And I thought, oh, I'm home.
Rabbi Zamor, you have always been a beacon. Not only when you were here as our rabbi, an amazing rabbi in so many ways, but a beacon of light to women in the rabbinate, and for all humanity, for that matter. We thank you. And Rabbi Jay, I just love saying that.
I love hearing it.
This will always be your home. Always be your spiritual home. We've loved having you, and we always want you to know that we love you and that not only are you welcome here, but we hope you'll come and spend some time with us. Thank you. Is it cheesecake time yet?
Thank you. Thank you to Cantor Novick, and we get to celebrate you next week, Friday and Saturday, which will be wonderful. One of the highlights of being a part of this community, being a rabbi, is that this is a rabbi synagogue, and so when we know when there's lots of rabbis that come here and pray, we know we're doing something that brings us joy. And so I thank you for all your leadership, for all your words tonight. And so we get to study a little bit more with more rabbis and more cantors. Thank you for those joining us online. We're going to continue this live stream because there are going to be some programs that are live streamed throughout this. So you can keep it online and just join us throughout tonight. But we have cheesecake over there outside you can eat. And then starting at 9:15 in the Greifer Sachs with Rabbi Josh Goldstein. So we welcome Rabbi Josh Goldstein, the newest member to our community. He's going to be talking about whatever happened to the confirmation class of 1998. We have more information. We can read about that. We can share that with you. With Rabbi Chuck Leitner, Charles Leitner in the library. That will be also on Zoom. The Hidden Bones of the Apocalypse. And with Cantor Alana Goldman celebrating Jewish women composers, how sacred music reformed tradition could be right here in the chapel. So we'll let you know. You can talk to Rabbi Appel if you need help, or me, and to let you know where to go. Please enjoy cheesecake, and we'll see you soon.
certain pronouns like him,
Yes.
and can't God be either female or transgender or?
I would absolutely agree. So I think that's a really good point. I was going to ask about that is, we'll notice as we go along musically how composers make intentional decisions about God language, about, all of the language. That's a really good point to point out. Absolutely. So we'll see, later on, Debbie Friedman, she uses words like Shekhinah, which is the feminine form of God. So we see even through one composer how throughout time how they relate to God and describe God language
Yeah,
is.
I remember the choir. It boggles my mind that during the high holidays, or Vina King, should it be our parent, our ruler?
So a lot, you'll see that, yeah, absolutely, that through our, different Sidurim and Machzorim, our different prayer books, that we'll see changes throughout time of how God, we speak about God. So what I was going to say about this song, Sing Unto God, I think, I wanted to start with this song because it was composed in 1973 and premiered the weekend of Shavuot. And what also happened in 1973, the weekend of Shavuot, is that Sally Priesand became a rabbi. So we have all of these things sort of happening at the same time where... 73.
It was also the year I got married.
Was it 2022?
2020. Oh, maybe so. Maybe I got the year. Oh no, I'm wrong. This was premiered in 1972. Okay. Yes. Okay. You know what? The YouTube is wrong, but this premiered in 1972. Exactly. So still fifth that same year, same weekend. So we have Rabbi Priesand being ordained in Cincinnati, and then at the same time in Minneapolis, this fully composed work by Debbie Friedman is being composed. And so why this text, Sing Unto God, becomes the title of her compilation of her anthology, which I have over here if we want to take a look. It's a big, you can see even from all the way over there, it is a big, oh, look at this lovely assistant. Thank you so much. Oh, no, that's okay. It's too much.
And it's that's why I said I'm happy to.
Oh, thank you. So you'll see this big compilation called, oh.
And it sounds so.
Everyone's so helpful. Yes.
Like the song, like you just hear it and it's like, oh, it sounds like it belongs with the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family.
Oh, wow, I have so many assistants. Thank you. That's so kind.
So many friends.
Yes, so many friends. So many friends. Great. Thank you. So yeah, so at this like you said, it sounds like the 70s. It's got that sort of, feeling to it. So why start with this? Because I think exactly like the rabbis were saying earlier, the same challenges that were happening for rabbis were happening for cantors and Jewish female singers that were happening. So I start with Debbie Friedman because what is the place where there was true egalitarianism? It wasn't really happening in synagogues, but it was happening at Jewish summer camp. Because in Jewish synagogues, women were always compared to male cantors. There were a lot of things in the voice, even just speaking to various, people here is, oh, well, I'm used to a male cantor. I'm used to a male cantor. I'm used to that sound. A lot of the chazanut, the ranges, the music composed was too high for women or too low for women, or it never just felt right. But where there was true egalitarianism was happening at camp. It was at camp where, women song leaders were really emerging. So that's where Debbie Friedman comes into play. And we'll notice tonight that all of our composers that we're going to be looking at, regardless of their Jewish background, they were all very influenced by camp, and they kind of all started off as song leaders. So even though our second composer, which we'll look at, had a classical music background, it was really camp that influenced her. Yes. Oh, I've got a clock.
When did Debbie Friedman, what community?
So she grew up in Utica, New York, And then they moved to Minneapolis, and she was very supported by her cantor in Minneapolis, but she felt a little lost Jewishly after she left her community in Utica. She was sort of searching, and it wasn't until she was so this work premiered in Minneapolis. So sort of in that still Central America that all of this is going on. Oh, amazing. Oh, there you go. That's a big claim to fame.
And it was the only summer she was there was when I was in national leadership.
What year was that?
70, I think, because I was in high school. And what stands out for me with Debbie is Debbie was 19.
Yes.
Okay, she broke out. She was composing already. She was a baby, you know, if you think about it. And the people who were with her were now Rabbi Danny Freelander. I saw wow. And now this is a cantor.
Jeff Klepper.
No, it wasn't Jeff Klepper. That was with Les Bronstein.
Yes, we're gonna go to him next. His wife is Benji.
I mean, I got to see some just remarkable men who were breaking out, and Jeff Klepper and Danny were both here performing when I was in high school.
Yes.
But she was just such a standout to be able to. I mean, she held court in the dorm rooms, and she was doing this music, and it was just so different, and even all the men were just helping her. I mean,
And what's really interesting is, Jeff Klepper, who you mentioned, goes on to cantorial school, and Danny Freelander goes on to be a rabbi, and Debbie Friedman never goes on to be a cantor. So, I don't know the role of gender in that. And of course, the cantorial school is named after Debbie Friedman, so my alma mater. Right, but so that was, a big thing. How do we name the cantorial school after someone who isn't a cantor? But her influence on cantorial music is so profound.
cantors, and I'm not going to say here necessarily, but some of us know a lot of the old school cantors, and they fought her music and the music of the others tooth and nail because it wasn't cantorial music. It was singable, and what's our job going to be if the congregation can sing?
Absolutely. And that's, she was her Misha Barach, which I have, below, is really the example of that empowering the congregation. Never could the congregation sing for their own healing. Now, of course, we have many settings of Misha Barach, but she was the first one. And you'll also notice, talking about text and music, that she interweaves Misha Barach, Avotenu, with May the source of, she intersperses the Hebrew with the English. So that was also very, so many ways was she revolutionary. And so we already spoke about that women cantors weren't ordained. There wasn't even an ordination until a few years ago. It was only, cantors were only invested. So there was this discrepancy too between even the language, and still on my smicha, I don't even think it says I was ordained. I think the Hebrew says some sort of investment language. So that's still something that's being worked on, is even the language discrepancies. So
Pays dividends.
what?
That's why you're invested, because having a
That isn't a gender, that's a role.
Yeah, for the cantors, yes. Yeah, it's all cantors, so. What sort of what? You know what? There's a lot she was a very private person, and so a lot of people, really even her closest confidants, didn't know that she was sick. So I'm not sure the details, but she was very, very private, and it was, very, very shocking her death. But for today, we're really focusing on Jewish liturgical music. There are so many, Jewish female composers. That's so big of a corpus, but we're really looking at the liturgical aspect of things, because this is the place where women have been excluded the most. And, women were accepted just as just as Rabbi Zamer was saying, like just like women could teach in school, similarly women could play music in their homes. You know, that wasn't banned. There was a lot of music making within the home. Yiddish theater. Jewish women were very prominent in Jewish theater. But it took a little bit longer for the liturgical music aspect, and that's because of, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the prohibition of kol isha. Kol is voice, and isha is women. And it was this, and it still is a prohibition against women's voices being heard publicly in singing. And this is how you hear of Women of the Wall in Jerusalem, where women are praying at the wall. And that's because women's voices were deemed to be sexually alluring, and that it would distract the men from their prayers. So,
Because I'm thrilled, but where's the source? Is it Mishnah? Is it Torah? Where is this actual source?
it's in the Talmud. It's in the Talmud. It doesn't say about the sexually alluring aspect, but it's, yeah, as most of our law is. You know, you take one. The term is kol isha, so that was expanded upon to, you know, be that women's voices were sexually alluring, and so women could pray, but only amongst other women.
I went to yeshiva
Mm-hmm.
in 5th and 8th grade, and in my afternoon class, 6th grade afternoon classes, for whatever reason, I have no idea why, they would always have mincha service, and every week only males would be in the service.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking, I'm 75 years old, so it's quite a few decades we were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
and things were so different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, along with that, while, you know, Reform and progressive Jewish communities didn't subscribe to this, there was still a damper on women's vocal expression. So although, you know, there wasn't necessarily a prohibition in the Reform movement, that became a ripple effect. So that, and you still hear, you know, this is still very much ongoing today. It's very hard for women to use, impossible almost for women to lead prayer in that way.
I remember when I was in 7th and 8th grade,
Mm-hmm.
they always said there are certain subjects they didn't want to teach them. And I don't know why, but I noticed sometimes they would just go from room to room for whatever reason.
Yeah, and so along with that, it's that, you know, women were seen as exempt from daily prayer. So it was like, why would we wouldn't want a woman to lead our prayers, because it's, you know, they should be at home. So all of this is going on in the background. And then again, with this second wave of feminism, and with Sally Priesand's ordination, and the camp movement, women were beginning to make those steps forward. So, you know, why do we need women composers? Let's just start with that. Like Rabbi Zamer was saying, you know, over the past 100 years, with women's bat mitzvah and simchat bat, celebrating women, we realized that there was this whole gap of life cycles that we needed music for. There was no language for how to celebrate, you know, bless a woman as she's coming into these next stages, how to sing about God in non-male-centered languages. So today we're going to be looking at a lot of different composers and where their similarities are, and how they each bring their own musical background to and their own experiences to the music that they write, and in their way are opening up the way for women. So the next composer we're going to be speaking about is Cantor Benji Ellen Schiller. And she is my teacher at HUC, and she actually, if you were here for my installation, she was one of the cantors that installed me. And I love her so much as a human being, but also deeply respect her as a composer. And so we're going to turn to her words about, keep going, the 5 M's of music. And as she is a cantor, and she is and she is a composer, she's very sensitive to, you know, what we were speaking about, that perhaps, you know, people felt like Debbie Friedman's, music was too participatory, and it was too, you know, it was just guitar, and there weren't different emotional levels. So she really is sensitive to about the prayer service and what music needs to accomplish for our prayer service. So let's see, does anyone want to start? Here, let me take one of these. Keep going in the packet. It's somewhere in there. Okay, it's the last page. Okay, where are we going with the music of prayer? And I think this is just, I read this, you know, she's very humble, so she doesn't have us often read things that she's written, but this was one of those things that she read. So would anyone volunteer to read the first couple of paragraphs? Where are we going with the music of prayer in our Reformed synagogues? And Alex will read.
Well, Alex, I was gonna volunteer.
Okay, you'll get the next
The
paragraph.
next one, because we like your accent.
I don't know which one to read from.
Where are
Okay, what's up?
Yeah.
Okay. Where are we going with the music of prayer of our Reformed synagogues? Does some larger cultural process exist within the contemporary Jewish community that will predetermine our sacred musics as it develops into the next century? How do we create a fluid, musically sound, and spiritually meaningful service? What will be the balance of styles? In our music to become fully participatory, will the pendulum swing so far toward inclusivity that we exclude music that requires a performance by a cantor and a professional choir and instrumentalists? What kind of prayer will speak to Jews today? How will the music help them on their spiritual path? Yeah, I don't think it's going to extend that far. Sorry.
Hold on a second. Well, it's a good thing I have a chair right here to come sit on. Look at that.
You're dedicated.
I know.
You can just read. We'll be happy.
All right. Are we on the mic? We're not on Zoom, are we?
I don't know.
Someone's listening.
Okay.
It's okay.
We need to understand clearly what occurs within music itself that creates a sense of prayerfulness. If we could scientifically break down sacred music to isolate various moods of prayer, perhaps we could perceive how certain prayer experiences directly relate to particular musical expressions. We have spent too much energy defending particular musical styles as if the music were the end in itself. Let us instead develop a new vocabulary of sacred music that will focus on the unique phenomena at the intersection of prayer and music. Here are descriptions of several distinct kinds of prayer. Even though the following terms may appear simplistic, perhaps they will help us discuss synagogue music beyond purely musical categories.
You want to keep going with majestic?
Anybody want to do majestic?
Okay, Pete wants to do majestic.
Majestic, a sense of awe and grandeur. Our first mood is majestic, that which evokes within us a sense of awe and grandeur. A classic example is the music of the first and second temple periods. The Levites, with full choir and orchestra, assembled a magnificent offering, suited only for God. What is our equivalent of majesty in musical prayer? Our liturgical text is certainly intent to inspire compassion on a regular basis. Look at the text of the Torah. The Torah says, Kedusha, Adon Olam, Shema, Hashpilin, not to mention our high holy day and festival origin. When we are ever so moved within our service as to sense the majesty implicit in so many of our prayers, how can we create awe and grandeur when inclusivity has become the hallmark of our age?
Beautiful, yeah. So she's kind of juxtaposing that majesty with, you know, the exactly like we spoke about. Oh, well, Debbie Friedman's music isn't majestic, but I think we know majestic is in the eye of the beholder. Anyone want to keep going with meditative? Oh, yeah. All right, go for it.
Inward and reflective. Our second mood is meditative, that which leads us inward toward reflective contemplative prayer. It is to know the still small voice within ourselves, the one that often eludes us. Consider the silent prayer. May the words Mishabeach or even Kol Nidre. Is our liturgical music conducive to moments of genuine meditation?
Beautiful. Anyone want to do meeting?
Creating and encountering creating and encountering oneness, our third mood is meeting moments in which we become aware of the larger community and literally meet other souls through prayer. When all voices join to create a resounding chorus of prayer, when every voice contributes its sound to the whole, a new expression of prayer is born. Even among strangers, we sense both a personal and a spiritual connection with these with whom we pray. Imagine a Seder table where everyone joins to sing a blessing or song. We have so many opportunities to create meeting moments within our liturgy when the Torah is taken from the Ark, or at the beginning or end of a section of the service, or on Yom Kippur. Whether majestic or meditative, whether the music style, the meeting of voices defines this type of prayer.
Yes. And I'm sure as we're hearing these, we're thinking of different musical settings that, sort of fit these. And so we'll as we go along, we'll see which of these does it fit into. Okay, moving along. We are moving along. All right, you're right there.
Moving along, creating momentum. Of course, not every melody fits into one of these categories. Some music functions as the connective tissue of the liturgy, carrying the worship from one section to the next. The Chatzi Kaddish on Shabbat evening, for example, may not readily be identified as music of meeting, meditation, or majesty, although some of us no doubt experience it in each of these ways. Mostly, I think of it as the music of moving along, or momentum. In this case, its music is traditional and connects us to our musical history. Its familiarity is comforting. Its specific melody, chant, or prayer mode is a reminder of where we are in Jewish sacred time. As an individual piece of music, it is relatively neutral. Its function is simply to punctuate one section of the service. But connectors, such as Chatzi Kaddish, fulfill an important task. They create momentum so that one prayer flows smoothly into the next.
Sure we've all been at services of different denominations where the focus is in different places, right? Like, maybe if you go to a morning minyan or you're at a Shiva minyan, the focus is more to move along. We're getting to a certain point. The goal is to get to Kaddish, and so we're moving our prayers rapidly. We're not going to sing 5 minutes of a meditative something or other. The goal is to get to a certain point. And we each have our own preferences, right? We might go to a service and say, oh my gosh, we hardly covered any liturgy. We just sang Elohai Neshama for 15 minutes and we didn't need to do that. And we barely covered any liturgy. So you'll find in different denominations too, the focus is different.
Conservative Orthodox, they do Musaf service.
Sure, absolutely. And you might notice in, conservative services that the goal is to move along at a much quicker pace. And so I think that one is, underestimated in its ability. And then the last one is memory. And I think she actually added this category later, and it covers that corpus of, I heard this at my Seder table growing up, that familiarity. And I think, which I'll speak about, is I think that's where the memory is actually the biggest challenge for women's composers, of course, because a lot of these traditional, what we call traditional, although Debbie Friedman's Misha Berach is the traditional Misha Berach, and Norit Hirsch's Oseh Shalom, Oseh Shalom Bimromam, has become the traditional Oseh Shalom, but that's where there's really a challenge, right, is those traditional pieces, that traditional Vishamru, those were not composed by women. So that's one of the challenges. But as we go along, I just love this because it really, categorizes the arc of a service in a musical way about these different things we need our music to do and the different ways where each of these musical composers fit in. And Benji in particular is really, her goal is to, something's dinging at me, is to really heighten the musicality of worship. She's really wants to say that cantors and women in particular can compose in really ornate ways. So we're going to listen to her Psalm 150, and this was written in 1982 when her husband was in his first year of rabbinical school. Similarly, she was kind of ambivalent about cantorial school. She didn't think that she was capable or that she could make it. But it's while she's in Israel that she's really inspired. So let's listen and hear what sounds of Israel and Jerusalem we can hear, and let's see how it's different from what we've heard so far. So this is her Psalm 150, which is all about musical expression and how we praise God through music. Categories do you think that this piece fits into, if you were to choose one? Meeting, moving along, memory, majestic, meditative. Majestic, yeah.
I think it's because of the choir. But I also feel like the drum, like people call that like a hand drum thing.
Yeah.
It makes it more approachable.
It's
not as formal.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would think that like more casual.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very good point. Yeah, I would agree. Majestic. Anyone feel like it's not majestic or it's a different category?
It's very festive.
Festive.
I can see it in meeting. Like, I can see people walking around with the Torah singing that because it's very,
yeah.
It's very happy.
It's very tribal too. Like everybody is all part of the same group. Very inviting.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, you hear that, I don't know if you heard, but you hear her voice kind of floating above in this descant. So you have the meeting, right? You have everyone singing together, and then you also have this descant of just hallelujah, just hallelujah. That's it. That's it.
It's very meditative, actually. If you stayed in it long enough, if you stayed in that rhythm and you stayed in that rhythm of drums, I think it would actually enter a very meditative headspace.
I always feel like she touches all the different categories.
Oh, she's good. She's good.
Look at each of them and say, I can see the majestic, I can see the memory, I can see the moving along, the words, but the music, but the instruments,
Yeah.
all of the above.
I love that.
I can really decipher the time.
Yes. And so how is this different then from, this is a basic question, but how is this different from the first one? Very different, right? Very different. I mean, we have a big difference in language, right? This is in Hebrew. It's in Hebrew, right? And it's got, although Debbie's was a choral work, but there was a lot more unison singing. There were only a few different parts. This has multiple parts. She goes from all choir with a descant to just the solo voice. Descant, that's like the floating melody above that yeah. So it's like a part that's, following with the choir, but it's detached. So that would be like the cantor, right? So because she's a cantor, she's writing for her voice and for other cantors too, right? Here's the choir, we have the full body choir, but here's the cantor. The cantor is floating above and still leading things, right? You can hear that difference with Debbie Friedman is like, there's that, you don't want to differentiate between the different voices. She really wants her voice to be differentiated and to have that special part to it. And at the same time, she serves with her husband at a congregation. She's retiring this year. But she was also very involved in the camp movement. She plays guitar as well, but she's also classically trained. So she's kind of always mixing those two modes together. And you also heard like the influences from Jerusalem. Like you were saying, it sounds tribal. She would say that she'd walk around and this is what she would hear, in the mornings on her walks. Okay, we're gonna sing one more song by Benji Ellen Schiller, and I will just say that she also has a big anthology which just came out only the past year, so it took her, 40 years into her career to produce an anthology. It's not so easy to have an anthology produced. In fact, there hasn't been one anthology produced of Jewish women's music. There's a few like small publications, but nothing by the main corpus transcontinental that is just women composers, which I can't believe. We have, songs about social justice, we have all sorts of musical compilations, but nothing that is just women composers. So hopefully something will come out. Yeah, I think there's a plan, but I'm not clued in on that. So if there's a plan, I will let you know. So let's look, but we're probably running out of time. We don't have time. Let's go to our next composer. This is Shefa Gold, and she's a rabbi, Rabbi Shefa Gold. She grew up, and I should say that Debbie and Benji both grew up in Reform households. Our next composer grew up in a traditional household, and her music focus is, Alex, you can hold it up. No, the next one. The rabbi, yeah, that one. The sacred sounds of magic of Hebrew chant. And so you might recognize we do her setting of Ozi vezimrat ya vatzvayehili lishua. We do that one all the times. Or Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Magadlu, Masechaya. And she outrightly says that her focus is to be meditative. She has no other goal. She says, when describing her style, she says, in composing a chant, I don't take a text and put it to music. I become intimate with the text, and the music is born out of this intimacy. Let these melodies live inside you. The notes are just the bare bones. So she's not trying to add, complex accompaniment with different chords. She really just wants the voice for you to repeat that text as much as possible. She takes 4 or 5 words of the Hebrew, and she just repeats that over. Ozi, vizimrat, ya, vayahi, li, lishua. 6 words. She takes 6 words and she repeats it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. You saw Benji's had multiple texts. She was really just focusing on a few. So let's learn something together. We're going to sing together. We're going to learn. I was just flipping through her book and I thought, what could we all learn together that would be something new? And so she takes a drone. So this is a simple drone. It's a C. I don't have a shruti yet. So here we go. What? Yeah, there's like an instrument where you can just drone out a box. It's a shruti box, but I haven't. Maybe I'll buy one now. That's like good, yeah. And it's just a drone, right? We just have this C minor. So we can each try if we want to take a different note. Let's see how it goes. Can anyone do this? I'm going to try singing above it. Okay. Here we go. Dalifnei miata omei. Dalifnei miata omei. influences that are part of her, she's very outward, that she combines her Buddhism and her yoga practice. And what I love about it is, it's not overwhelming with the Hebrew, right? Like, there's 6 words.
Yeah.
After a while, you will get it, and it's definitely that meditative and meeting. And you also don't need instruments. She's really exposing the bare voice, right? It's about the power of the voice, that with our voices, we almost don't need anything else. Yeah, absolutely. So I show that one because it's very different to Benji's style, right? Like with the choir and the hand drums and the different chords and the descant. It's a different type of meeting than Debbie's with the guitar, right? It's a different kind of experience, and you also really need the other voices, right? Like, you need each other to sing it. Like, I could sing Dalifne Miatome, but it's not until we're really together and we have those different harmonies that it comes to be. There's a second part. Maybe we'll learn it some other time. So she's the only one actually that I don't think had any influence with camp. I couldn't find anything about camp. Another thing you'll notice is the vocal range was like 4 notes. So anyone can sing this. While Benji, as a cantor, she was having, descant, huge range. She wants to show off her range. This is, anyone can really sing this. Anyone can lead prayer and participate. Our last composer is Alana Arian. And there are so many, of course, more composers. It was very hard to choose. But she's also a teacher of mine, and she just became on faculty of HUC. And she's composing a lot of music. We just sang last night her Yeah, we know it, we love it. We've also done, oh gosh, I do her stuff all the time, but she has she has so many great things. She does not have an anthology out yet, so yeah, we're gonna do that.
Last night too.
Yes, we did that exactly last night for the kids. Exactly. Thanks, you were paying attention.
I was here.
She was a very big part of what SAJ did for their religious school.
Oh yeah. Oh, for Hine Matov, of course. Hine Matov.
That's her.
Yeah. Oh, that's hers. Thank you so much. Yes, that Hine Matov. And so she is really able to cross over all the different things that we have to do in synagogue music. We have to sing for kids, we have to sing for adults. So, and she grew up at Kutz Camp, and Debbie Friedman's piano lives in her home. So she's like the next generation after Debbie Friedman. Her mom was best friends, Mary Arian was best friends with Debbie Friedman, and she says that she was raised on equal parts Mozart, Joni Mitchell, and Joni Mitchell. So she's got a lot of different styles, and she was not really, she kind of, pushed away like the Jewish liturgical side of her for a while. She composed, a lot of secular music. She played on Broadway, and she, in the past, I would say in the past 6 years has really embraced composing for Jewish synagogues.
Joni Mitchell?
Yes, that's...
Taxi, John, what was taxi?
Yeah, that's what she said. So this was so great, everyone. Thank you for joining. Go eat some cheesecake. And go, when we listen now in synagogue, we're going to open up our ears and we're going to try as much to not say we like the traditional melodies. And we're going to try to be more open. And we're going to, No.
So thank you, Kendra Goldman, for
Yes,
teaching
my
us.
joy.
Eat some more cheesecake,
more
and then we
cheesecake.
have 2 sessions beginning at 10:15.
I hope you're having some nice cheesecake. We're going to start in a second. Thank you. Oh, do you need one? Absolutely. Got it? People study with me all the time. You don't get to study with me. So thanks for staying up late with me to study a little bit more. Thank you to those joining us online. If you want to use the chat box and let us know where you are learning with us from today, you can. I can look at my probably my mom and dad in North Carolina. They might be joining us. So, hi, Mom and Dad. What? Oh, the Mets are up 1-0. So if we have to leave at the top of the first, I know we could be. The nice thing about West Coast time, we can study for 45 minutes, and we'll be home in time for the game, like the third inning. So perfect timing. So thank you to the Mets for having a West Coast game tonight. So when thinking about what I wanted to study tonight. I couldn't help but think about current events, and a lot of our focus this evening has been on the importance of women. As there was at least one class that focused on women. We had an amazing panel. We had Rabbi Zamor talk. I know that Cantor Goldman taught here, and I know that Samara is teaching now about women in the Book of Ruth. And I felt, while we are living in this world where we are hearing a lot about reproductive rights and Roe versus Wade, that I wanted to really look at the Jewish text that people use on reproductive rights. And so I say reproductive rights. While we know that reproductive rights directly affects mostly women, we also know that there are, it's not just women that reproductive rights affects. And so we will focus on the woman tonight, but knowing that it's a larger conversation these days as well. 83% of Jews, according to the Pew study, are pro-choice. 83%. Of all religions, we are the religion, and that's Reform Jews, that's Conservative Jews, that's Orthodox Jews. We're going to look at all of those streams of Judaism. Of all religions, we are the religion that is probably most pro-choice, or than any other. And so, why is that? Does anyone? We're gonna have conversations, but why is that? Do you think? Is it because of our text, or is it because of something else? Yeah.
This is how we interpret the text.
Okay, so it's how we interpret the text.
Other religions use those texts, but other texts as well, and interpret them differently.
Right, so people interpret our text differently, so this is how we interpret our text. But it's the reason you're pro-choice because of it's the reason I don't want to speak for other people because there might be people, and we're going to look at texts from Judaism's viewpoints that are not pro-choice as well, right? But is the text the reason? Are ancient texts the reason why I believe that a woman has the right to choose? Is that the reason why people? Is that the reason? Not for you. What is it?
It's because I believe that we have the right to decide what happens to our lives.
Right. So it's not the text, but you believe that it's what happens to your life. It's your lives, and so that's why perhaps.
Well, and it also has to do with the fact that I don't necessarily believe that it's a viable life until a certain point in time. That just because you've had conception
Right. So so science plays a little bit of a role into this.
Like if it me over somebody else, right, that would be wrong.
Right.
But it's that kind of sense of.
Anyway, anyone else say why does Judaism affect their decision or their viewpoint on reproductive rights? Yeah.
Doesn't Judaism define the beginning of life differently than the Christian?
Okay, so Judaism might define it differently, and so that makes us, that affects how we might decide what we.
It doesn't begin until birth, as opposed to, I think, some of the.
Right. Absolutely. So our text might look differently. Our ancient text looks differently than Christian ancient text, and so we read it differently. And so I can share my religious viewpoints by looking at my text. So let's look at some of those texts today. It doesn't mention, and also I think it's really important, it does not mention, abortion is not mentioned in the Torah, right? This is, reproductive rights is not mentioned in the Torah, right? This is not mentioned. There are texts that illuminate some of the decisions around these texts, but nowhere in the text does it say this person had decided to end their pregnancy. Nowhere says that. So we look at our text in a modern light to say, what does this text mean to us as modern Jews, and how does it play a role in my life? And I might disagree with the text, or I might agree with the text. As Reformed Jews, that's what we do, right? I look at the text of Leviticus. There are many things in the book of Leviticus that say that you can't do this or you can't do that, and I think that's I'll throw that aside. And there's texts that I say, oh yeah, I agree with, and I'll keep that a text, right? There's kashrut rules that we have created, right? Do I agree with those rules? As a modern Jew, I can interpret. And so we interpret these texts tonight. And so let's look at the first one. Lisa, can you read the first one? Did everyone, there's the sheets there if you didn't get one when you came in. Do you want to read that one out loud? Yeah, so, perfect. All right, so we're looking at, this is a text, we'll look at one biblical text, and then most of our texts come from the Mishnah or the Talmud, and then we have a couple modern texts we'll look at if we have time. And so that's 1st century Mishnah CE to 5th century Talmudic times. And so Rav Hisa said, and if she is pregnant until 40 days from conception, the fetus is merely water. It's not yet considered a living being. And so this text is quoted a lot in Jewish circles. And what is this text saying?
It's saying that the fetus is just water.
Yeah, the fetus is just water. So there's a conversation, when does life start? Some people believe life starts at conception, right? Some people believe, oh, that's when it starts, right? And according to this Jewish text, doesn't start at least till 40 days.
It doesn't even seem to indicate that it is the potential for life.
Right, it's not even the potential to life. And so why is that? Why is this an important text? Right, it might not even be the potential, it's just water. Why is this an important text? Why did the rabbis even write about this? There's probably a lot of miscarriages before 40 days, right? And so they wanted to create a text because of that, there's also rules around purity for the woman. And so thinking about that a little bit more and around miscarriage. So, and also what is, and they wanted to kind of start defining when is life. And so 40 days, how many weeks is that? 6 weeks, 7 weeks, probably around then. We are able to document now with science kind of when someone gets pregnant or when that happens. But here are 40 days, so 6 or 7 weeks. So let's hold on to that text. And now we go to the most famous text that's found in Parshat Mishpatim in Exodus 21, verse 22, verse 25. This is the text that is quoted most. And we will delve into it today. Anyone want to read that for me? Yes.
When two parties fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact, the payment to be based on revenue. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, bird for bird, wound for wound, bruise for bruise.
Who studied this text before? Has anyone studied that? Okay. Rossi has. So this is a famous text. So they're fighting. This is all about rules in the book of Exodus Mishpatim. Rules. There's two people fighting, and there's a pregnant woman, and they're fighting, and like they're battling, or something happens, right? And the pregnant woman gets pushed, or something's thrown at her, and she dies. What happens if she dies? Soul for a soul, right? Eye for an eye, right? You are, then you die, right? So a soul for a soul, those two people die, right? If you murdered someone, then you die. If you pushed her off a ledge, something happens, right? If you bumped into her and something happens, that she dies, then it's your fault, and it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If she's pregnant and she survives, she's okay, but she miscarries, right? A miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues. She's fine, but she miscarries. What happens? You get a fine. It's a monetary fine. So why is this text a text that we look at when we talk about reproductive rights? Yeah, the husband decides what the fine is, right? So the husband decides what the fine is, and this is what you need to give me. It's not murder. It is not murder. It is not a life. Because if our Torah text said if they miscarries and now it's an eye for an eye, then it is a life. But here, the fetus, as we look at the text above, it's not considered life because the penalty is different. And so we look at this text and say, according to Jewish law, according to Torah, the life of the mother is a life. The life of a potential baby, a potential life, is not quite yet. And so we highlight this text. And so many Jewish organizations who decide that does it say anything about abortion here? No. But who might say pro-life, pro-choice, that it's not a child, it's not a life. Look at this text. And so there's a little commentary on it. We have, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda's Hanassi? He's the redactor of the Mishnah. He's one of the most famous. He is the authority of authorities for this ruling. He holds, a fetus is considered as its mother's thigh, a part of its mother's body, and it is as though the master transferred ownership of one of her limbs to her. Since the maidservant is pregnant, the child is considered to be a part of her. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi sees that the fetus is just a part of the child, of the mother.
What ruling is this referring to? Where it says for this ruling, is that Exodus?
Yeah, Exodus. Yes, a commentary on the Exodus of why it's a ruling of why is it only a fine, a monetary fine? It's because the miscarriage. It's just a part of it. The fetus is part of the mother. It's an extension of her. But there's some rabbis that actually disagree with this, and so we have Rabbi Shlomo Nachman. And can someone read this English reading for me?
crucial birth when the context is considered. The text actually said that the child, the thought, the ruling know that damaging ensued from the event. In other words, if because of the struggle, the baby is born early with another wife on, then the men may be required to pay damages for their carelessness no more. But if other damage ensues, in other words, the baby is born with some deformity or born dead, then the standard penalties will apply, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. The child dies as a result. The man is guilty of murder, life or life. The text makes no sense any other way. The Hebrew term Shavuot, reference to abortion or miscarriage, that word is not used here.
So our this rabbi interprets it. Who's this rabbi? It's a modern rabbi, yes. A modern rabbi, yes. He's a modern rabbi who organizes a group called Jews Pro-Life Judaism. So it's a modern rabbi, a Hasidic rabbi, who looks at this text differently. And this text is actually very interesting because if you look at the Greek translation or the Christian translation of Mishpatim, of the Exodus, it reads a little differently. And I was actually looking for that in one of my papers. I'll find it in a second. But they read it as more of a, as this rabbi reads it, as more of a deformity of afterbirth instead of a miscarriage in that sense. And so even in this text, even in the text that we're reading here in Exodus, there is some understanding that, I read it differently than you, right? It doesn't say abortion. It doesn't say anything like that. So why are we even using this text? It's a good question. Why even use this ancient text to talk about, do we believe an eye for an eye now, right? Do I believe for an eye now if someone murders an individual? No, right? Am I for capital punishment? Not really. So why do I even look at a text like this when it doesn't fit into my Reformed Jewish values? Or I say, look, text is really just saying what a life is. When does life start? And is it really life now? And so let's continue a little bit. We'll look at a Mishnah. So there's the question about when does life start? We know the fetus not even water for 40 days. It's not the same. Life is not even. It's not the same as someone who's currently living because the punishment is different. And now we see a little bit of a graphic text in the Mishnah about when do you save a life. Can someone read that for me?
If a woman is having trouble giving birth, they cut up the child in her womb and bring it forth limb by limb, because her life comes before the life of the child. But if the greater part has come out, one may not touch it, for one may not set aside one person's life for that of another.
So a woman's given birth. And so when does the life of the woman, the mother, matter more? Not matter more, but when does it take precedent over the child? Right, she's having trouble giving birth. Not until, right, the greater part of the child has come out. So you save the life, according to this Mishnah, right? We know that childbirth is a difficult time no matter what. And there is, so a woman is having trouble. So what do you do until this moment? When is that moment? And they say, the Mishnah says, when the greater part has come out. What does that even mean? 51%, okay, that could be. One may not touch it, right? So then you would say perhaps that child that's coming out instead of the mother. And so this text, then the next text from Rashi is trying to figure out what this exactly says. Its head comes out. With a woman that has experienced difficulty giving birth and is in mortal danger, it is taught that the first section of this teaching, the midwife extends her hand and cuts it up and extracts the pieces. As the entire time that it has not gone out into the air of the world, it is not considered a soul. And so it is impossible to kill it and to save its mother. But when its head comes out, we cannot touch it to kill it, as it's like a born baby, and we do not push off one soul for the sake of another. These are graphic texts, right? These are troubling texts. These are difficult texts. Our rabbis had difficult decisions to make about life. And so Rashi expounds upon this text to really figure out what does it even mean. And here, not until the head comes out do we start saving that baby over the mother's life. And so if the baby is breached, rather, right? Luckily, our science is different these days, right? Luckily, we know more. Medicine is different, right? We are able to. We don't have to make these decisions. Or unfortunately, some people do have to make these decisions. Unfortunately, it's not as common. But there's the opportunity to say, when do we help one life over another life? Absolutely, great. All these commentaries are written by men as well.
Until a man gives birth, he won't know what it's like to experience all of these different things. And for somebody to come at them, the way it says in that Shavuot, and cut it up limb by limb.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So these are barbaric, absolutely, right? But the idea of also trying to save a life. Right, there is their aspect of we were trying to save the mother's life, we're trying to save the child's life. We are faced with these decisions, and the rabbis have to answer the decision somehow, and so they use these texts. But it's based on men.
Follow-up: all of these commentaries were written at a time when the concept of choice for a woman about anything didn't exist.
Right. The woman didn't even have a choice. So, right, why even have, right? Like, this is not, so these are men talking about women's choices, or, right? And so they're absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, here we see, in this Rashi, we see that the woman has a choice. It doesn't say that someone else cuts the baby. It says that the woman itself, the woman who is giving birth, stretches her hand and cuts this, no, I'm looking at Hebrew. So either they thought that the woman has the right of self-defense to do it, but another person doesn't have the right, or that it has to be her agency, that she has to make the decision. But we see that.
Right. So here, I like your Rashi on Rashi, right? You see the idea of like the woman actually gets to choose here.
They translated the midwife extends, but here it says Chaya is a woman who is giving birth.
Right. So sometimes our translation, as we looked in even Mishpatim, changes by reading this. So the midwife extends her hand, right? So it could be the woman that's giving birth, right? The woman that is having the choice. So let's look at a commentary. We're going to look at some more modern text now. Flip it over one page. The Issue of Abortion, Blue Greenberg. So let's look at a woman's voice here. She's a feminist Orthodox writer and teacher. Since there are no traditional Jewish precedents for abortion on demand, one way to maintain some integrity with the halakhic Jewish legal framework could be to broaden the interpretation of the therapeutic abortion, to extend the principle of precedence of the mother's actual life and health to include serious regard for the quality of life as well. Although one can envision a halakhic stance that urges avoidance of abortion for all the familiar traditional and theological reasons, the circumstances under which abortion is permissible may be widened. Such conditions may include the emotional inability to cope with childbearing and rearing. For example, the need to support oneself or one's spouse through school, the time required for marriage to stabilize, overwhelming responsibilities to other children, and so forth. In these cases, abortion should be seen as a necessary rather than an evil. Indeed, many mitzvot are interdependent functions of timing, and of the conditions they regulate. So this is an Orthodox feminist writer and teacher, and what's she saying? How does she read the halakha? Yes, so it's besides. So we looked at the text from the Mishnah, right? It's not just about the woman's health. There's other extenuating circumstances that Blue Greenberg sees and says there's other reasons why people might decide to end a pregnancy, right? What are these reasons? They could be because they're just unable to do this, or they don't have the support, or something happened that's caused them to be pregnant in the first place, and it's unfair for them, right? They're looking at the woman. Blue is looking at not just the health or the physical health, but also the mental health of a woman.
I think she's also looking at the ongoing health of the child, right? Like if the mother isn't able to provide the child Emanu-El, then that's going to negatively impact the health of the child forever.
Right. So that, and in a halakhic way, some of you're not going to be able to carry out the other mitzvot that are commanded as well. It's for the child's perhaps sake, but also the woman is not going to be able to, if the child is born, might not be able to carry out some of the other halakhically, the Jewish law that is commanded upon her as well.
Under what circumstances is abortion legal in Israel currently, since they are basically controlled by the chief rabbinate?
Good question. I'm pretty sure it's legal. Yeah. Yeah, Razi.
You have to go before a committee, which includes psychologists and doctors, and the woman who wants to have the abortion has to explain it. In most cases, it is approved. It depends on how late it is, but in most cases, it's approved and it's done in public hospitals,
Right.
It's not a private thing.
Yeah.
It's public medical services.
Right.
But do the rabbis get involved in it?
Well, it's not. I'm sure the rabbis, if you go up to your rabbi and ask, if you grow up in a Hasidic family and you need to go to your rabbi, you need to go and you are asking questions, or I'm sure they would get involved. But that's not secular Israelis do not have to go to a rabbi. They have to go to rabbis for other things, to get married and other things, which is another story. We could study that next year, and maybe we will. But the idea is that it's your choice.
And also, even in the religious and observant circles, if there is an indication that the child is going to be handicapped,
Right.
or with a severe, rabbis find many creative ways to give permission to perform abortion rather than retarded or severe.
Right, the severe genetic diseases, right? Unfortunately, we know that's many in the Jewish tradition, and so I think that the rabbis are much more lenient on these cases than other things in other practical aspects as well, which is an interesting point when we think about America, right? Right, these laws are very Christian, right? This comes from we are a minority, and so there are issues around this about church and state issues, right? If you are saying that I can't do this, but actually look at my text, and this is what my text says. Some people go the route of reproductive rights through a church-state issue. This is my own practice, and so you can't tell me what to do because I am able to practice my tradition or my religion in other ways. And so some Jewish institutions look at it that way. A freedom of speech issue, right? A freedom of, a First Amendment issue, right? A freedom of religion. And so by making these laws, this is against my freedom of religion. And so there are some practices that takes away from the science, takes away from the health of women, but actually does a freedom of religion argument. And so we'll hear perhaps some of those arguments going forward as well. Let's look at actually what the Reform movement says. A 20th century Reform rabbi, when is abortion permitted? The Reform movement has a long history of liberalism on many social and family matters. We feel that the pattern of tradition until the most recent generation has demonstrated a liberal approach to abortion and has defiantly permitted it in the case of any danger in the life of the mother. The danger may be physical or psychological. When this occurs at any time during the pregnancy, we would not hesitate to permit abortion. Those who are within the broadest range of permissibility permit abortion at any time before birth, if there is a serious danger to the health of the mother or the child. We would be in agreement with the liberal stance. We do not encourage abortion, nor favor it for trivial reasons, or sanction it on demand. So the Reform movement has had a long history of in favor of reproductive rights and a pro-choice movement. Not saying, but it's also your own choice, right? This is your own choice, and I think that's essential, right? They're not saying, Rabbi Jacobs does not say that we encourage abortion, but it's important that the woman, the family, has the right to choose. And that's your own personal decision. And so that's where we our understanding comes from, and right. But I would say, as Reformed Jews, people might come to me for guidance. People might ask me questions, but the majority of those questions are, what should I name my child? Right? What's the Hebrew name? Or can I eat rice on Passover? Right? I think as Reformed Jews, there's rarely an opportunity. Do people come occasionally seek guidance around these issues, because it's a personal issue, all right? And so I would share a text, but I would say, this is your choice. This is your choice. This is your own choice, and we'll support you in any choice that you make. And now there are rituals around abortion, mikvah, right? This idea of, and it's your own personal choice. And so the Reform movement stands by that. Yes. This is late. This is one of them. This is early 1930s, 1940s. So this is our oldest text of it's not, and we've changed even more now as well. Yes, right, absolutely. So I don't have the date. I should have written down, but this text is a much more. It's the foundational text of where the Reform movement stands, and we've adapted even more over this century as well. And a last text, a statement by the Union of Orthodox Congregations of America on the U.S. Supreme Court's potential overturning of Roe versus Wade. So this is a modern text written a month ago. Can someone read that for me?
Jewish law places paramount value on choosing life and mandates, not as a right, but as a responsibility, safeguarding our own lives and the lives of others by behaving in a healthy and secure manner, doing everything in our power to save lives, and refraining from endangering others. Abortion on demand, the right to choose, as well as the right to die, are thus completely at odds with our religious and halachic Jewish legal values. Legislation and court rulings that enshrine such rights concern us deeply on a societal level. Yet that same mandate to preserve life requires us to be concerned for the life of the mother. Jewish law prioritizes the life of the pregnant mother over the life of the fetus, such that where the pregnancy critically endangers the physical health or mental health of the mother, an abortion may be authorized. It's not mandated by halacha and should be available to all women, irrespective of their economic status. Legislation, court rulings federally or in any state that absurdly ban abortion without regard for the health of the mother would literally limit our ability to save our lives in accordance with our responsibility to preserve life.
So Orthodox movement from the Union of Orthodox Congregations has this statement. It's a powerful statement, right? In both ways, right? Abortion on demand, the right to choose, are thus completely at odds with our religious and halakhic values. However, legislation and court rulings that enshrine such concerns us deeply on a societal level, right? The power that the women, irrespective of their economic status, should ban the health of the mother, limiting those, literally limiting our ability to live our lives in accordance with our responsibility to preserve life. The Orthodox movement, that is much more halachically driven, that looks at these laws and follows these laws, comes out with a statement is, I think, a pretty powerful statement.
To me, it reads like we're concerned about separation of church and state, and we believe that it's not something that the state should be because it's based on our religion and our right, and so we need to make the decision based on what our religion tells us, not based on what the senators think everybody wants because they're the senators.
Right, between church and state, as well as the health of a mother, the health of, and is it the physical health, of course. As we looked at our text, it's also the emotional health. What does this life look like for the child going forward as well? Right. Right. And these are the questions. And so we look at these Jewish texts and we say, oh, this is what Judaism perhaps says, but there are many more texts. There's a lot more texts that we didn't have time to look at. And are these texts important for us, for me, in the decisions that I make at the ballot box? I'm not sure, right? Do I think about this text? I don't know, right? And then we opened it with that. Like, why do we have different viewpoints? And I respect anyone's viewpoints, right? I respect anyone's decision and what they think. But I look at these texts and I say, okay, well, this is perhaps what Judaism teaches. Does that help me make my own decision on what I think? Perhaps. And I wonder if these texts help us or solidify our thinking in a different way as well.
The Orthodox statement makes a very interesting comparison to the right to die, right to choose as well as the right to die. And I think that the point is that yes, there are states that have the right to die, but no one would say, okay, a person can just say, I have the right to die, go to a hospital or a clinic and say, sign a document and and the doctor can just help him die without any control. Right. They say basically this has to be done. There should be some criteria. They can be wide, but it couldn't be just a woman decides I want to have an abortion, right. And this is consistent with the general approach of the Orthodoxy, who would say, of course you can decide by yourself that you want to break Shabbat. There are all kinds of circumstances where you are allowed, but this has to be consistent with some laws and precedents, and it's not an individual decision. But this doesn't mean that when they have a case, they're not allowing.
Right, it's not saying they're open, right? There's not. We don't want to close the doors. We want to make you able to have these decisions, perhaps with other people to help you guide these decisions. But this is a decision that you should be able to make.
This is just a thought that popped into my head. Would this be considered more of instead of a church versus state, would it be considered more of a church versus church?
Well, church versus church, right? Well, then it becomes perhaps, right? I don't know if it's church versus church because where the church is not making, we don't belong to church. The church is not saying what we could do, right? The states are saying what we can or cannot do.
In some respects, they do. Like in specifically Catholic hospitals, they would choose
absolutely right
the baby over the mother, to let the mother die.
Right. So And that's a church, right? And that becomes another whole thing, right? So there's a whole church state. Can you mandate abortions? Can all hospitals mandate it? If you're a Catholic church, a Catholic hospital, and you don't want to do it, and that comes with contraceptions as well, right? There are decisions, or we also know it's like wedding cakes as well, or it's against my religion to have a wedding at my venue. And that's a whole decision about freedom of speech, freedom of religion that the court has also answered as well. Yeah.
But, I mean, if it's a Catholic church, it's not public. It would be a private hospital, so it would have different rules. In theory, even if it gets public funding.
Right. So that the private public hospitals is definitely a challenging thing, and I'm glad I'm not a politician in that sense. Yes. Any other final? Men going for a vasectomy. Halakhically, I think that it is illegal or not. I clicked something yesterday about that. I will get back to you. But I think actually it says that they are, because there's also the commandment, be fruitful and multiply, right? And so vasectomies would be halakhically frowned upon. If there was no medical reasoning. But I'll get back to you next week. But I did read something recently, yesterday, quickly on that. So good question. Any other final comments or thoughts? It's a tough, especially at 11 o'clock at night. It's a tough conversation, but I think it's an important conversation to say. There are really wonderful resources to help me with this reproductive rights text. The National Council of Jewish Women have a lot of text on it. The Reform Movement has a lot of text on it. Other organizations are doing good learning and studying, and I think it's also important. We talked really just through text, but there's also stories that we didn't hear. And their personal stories that affect people's decisions on their own choice. And those stories we didn't hear tonight. This was text at Shavuot. We studied text. But I think an important text that is missing from tonight are the stories of women who make difficult decisions. I don't think anyone takes these decisions lightly. And so I think that we need to honor those decisions and continue to have the conversation and continue to say how does our Judaism affect the way we vote? How does our Judaism affect the way we see different choices, different freedoms? Sometimes it really affects us, and sometimes it just might be on the periphery. Hag Shavuot Sameach. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock with our confirmation class, if you want to join us. We'll do Yisker at tomorrow evening. Tomorrow around 12-ish with our confirmation class. But it was great to study with all of you. It's going to be streamed as well, of course. So, absolutely. So I hope to see everyone soon. And thank you for staying up late with me.
President Clinton famously said that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Maybe that's a phrase we need to bring back into the public discussion.
Right.
It's a great evening, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
All right, let's leave over here.
It does feel like we can all just like, everything
We'll be
we got
back
on our
shortly,
faces
yeah.
is breaking, you're breaking the rules.
But that'd be my
All right, that was great, Samara.
Because we were looking at the text, we were looking at from Exodus.
Yeah.
And that is part of our Torah.
Yeah.
But the Torah is also a part of, I'm assuming that's what the Catholic religion uses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and-
because they translated it a little different, and then there's more about Jesus. Now
Okay.
it's Jesus.
And then, okay, so I was just wondering, because if we're using that
Yeah,
as,
Old Testament, then the New Testament is much more explicit.
and then it like
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, and oversees.
Okay.
Well, they expound upon it. So. Yeah.
Pretty sure, yeah. Just, I guess, get the books maybe, so we don't have to do that tomorrow, and because everyone's out. I think there's like a pin.
Is it a pin? Do you pull out?
Yeah, you push in with a pin and pull.
Pin your ass.
Is there no
I see this thing right here. I figure I just push in. You done? You finished? Let me see it. Let me see how.
I thought you said do this tomorrow, Joe.
What?
I thought you said you wanted to do this
We
tomorrow.
need the mics in the morning, don't we? How the fuck do you get these things out?
Yeah, they were very hard to push in. You want me to do them?
Oh, is that what you do?
Yeah.
I am.
That's
That's what I tried out, but it's like
You want me to
not
do it?
much. I think you need like
You
something.
want? I don't need this before. Oh, there you get back up.
Life alert.
All temple workers should have life alert. Did she show no life? No.
Get this one. You guys always gonna fucking lose.
You can take the right one.
I'll take that. Is there like, do I can't get this one with it over there or?
Yeah, the mic stand, yeah.
Yeah. This one not working.
Well, you gotta get it out.
Wanna try, Joe? It's stuck forever.
You push in, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's push
Use like
in.
one
I
of your-
can't push it no more.
Use like one of your keys or something just like a little harder. Did Chris leave? After him? He's a minor, he can't be out this late.
No.
Chris, he's sitting over there on the chair, I just pulled him over.
did this